Welcome to the second session, the principal seminar. This is on inclusivity. So inclusivity, we believe in fair and widespread access to our software with an emphasis on ease of use. This also extends to social inclusivity, permissionless participation, interoperability, and investing in educational efforts. So just briefly talking about status. So when I say status, I don't just mean the app. I also mean sort of the organization and everything in this sort of universe and all the people in it. Kind of like the state of us or the status republic or status network, whatever you want to call it. And I think company and product are sort of misleading mental models. Yalu on status, he was suggesting something like instead think of it as a DAO or a public good, but whatever sort of you use, that it's sort of this other thing, which is not the company, it's not the product per se. So fair and widespread access, just simple things like the fact that it works on sort of all devices and across multiple languages, and it's sort of not just for first world users with Apple iPhones or sort of privileged accounts or passports or whatever it might be. It's also worth noticing here that access is not passive. This is the same thing as like running and using and studying and contributing to status. Ease of use. So this was alluded to in the previous seminar about it sort of being usable for non-experts and not non-threatening, but also for us as contributors and power users, and that we don't sort of dump things down, but we can actually sort of expose all the things that we need or people might want. And also things like kind of basic stuff, but software compatibility and these kinds of things. So you don't have to increase stuff in order to use status. Social inclusivity. So essentially like encouraging people to participate. And one way you can think of this is as kind of rings on a water, or you have activation ladders. So as you get more and more invested in status, that you sort of get closer and closer, you invest more and more time and energy and so on into it. And it might start very simple, but then sort of this is sort of a way to get closer to some kind of core, whatever that is. And it's worth going back to sort of the company product thing, that right now it's kind of this thing where we have core contributors and then we have sort of consumers, the mass audience, whatever. And if you have this sort of more fluid model in mind and you reduce barriers to entry, you would still have this difference in terms of participation, but it might seem like the same thing, but it's not. And this one idea of like this 1-9-90 rule. So if you have a subreddit, maybe one person creates a post, 9 people comment, and then 90 people read. And having this sort of mental model that you have different forms of participation, but it's sort of more fluid and it's permissionless in terms of diving deeper into status and not just you're hired or not hired kind of thing. And this is really sort of everyone's job and self-interest. And just thinking about one way of thinking about responsibility, that it's sort of the power to do something, so you have the ability to do something. And it's something everyone has the power to do. There's some sort of basic questions that might be interesting to ask yourself, like how many people have you personally onboarded? How many sort of open problems have you identified and created that other people can look at and contribute to solving? How many people have you helped in status or online more generally? And sort of one simple way of doing this and getting people to sort of invite people, like reaching out the hand to sort of dive deeper in terms of participation, is to give people like concrete calls to action, people to dive deeper. And this can be very simple things like just installing status or reporting a bug or whatever it might be. But very sort of simple, straight actions. Interoperability. So essentially this is sort of a clear and well understood interface. And this is a very general concept. So both on a sort of organizational level, but also when it comes to protocols and the fact that we are part of the Ethereum ecosystem and people who contribute to a Whisper protocol, but then also our application protocols should be sort of have a clear interface so other people can use it. And it's sort of useful and used by other people that are not just status core contributors or whatever. And it's not an isolated network. Educational efforts. So really this is what this means, that is just that we put time, money, and energy into people learning. And this is very much sort of a bottleneck for crypto adoption in general. And I would even say for not just sort of for people outside of core contributors, but also at status in terms of us understanding these ideas and sort of grokking this new paradigm. where Grok is just like intuitively understand these things because it's new and it's not the same as we've seen before, and sort of what does that mean and what does it imply, and this requires effort in terms of learning about them, understanding. Principles pairing. So openness and inclusivity. We talked about this before. Adam brought up some good points. I think that one way to think about it is that sort of having a big contributor network, it's not the same thing as traditional hiring. And if you look at sort of the cost of having a larger contributor network, or the cost of people, you can boil it down to like money, so coordination costs, and then maybe some noise in a chat room somewhere. And you can think of sort of core contributors as more stewards. And then you have sort of people in this open network, and they get funded by a subset of other people in the network who value the work to do. And this sort of leads to kind of massive polarization possibilities where you don't need coordination because you have this permissionless model. And in sort of the history of humanity in terms of how we social organize and so on, in the last 20 years, we've seen this little proof of concept called Linux. And what they have is they have around 1,000 monthly active contributors, and then they have 12 lieutenants that act as kind of stewards for different components or maintainers for different parts of the code. And then you have roughly one Linus. That's sort of how they organize. Shower thoughts here. So if we measure inclusivity and sort of are clear about what it means, and we execute on it relentlessly on a sort of week-to-week or month-by-month basis, it's literally the same thing as mass adoption of Ethereum. It's not much difference there. Another shower thought. So before we can have mass adoption, where mass adoption means something like millions of people, we need sort of intense micro-adoption. And this is quote by Y Combinator, that it's better to have few people love you than a lot of people liking you. And in terms of paths for this, one way is sort of to look at status quo contributors first, and then sort of the larger Ethereum community. So that's why moving to status, which more and more people are doing, which is amazing, is so important. But then also larger sort of the Ethereum community and things like DevCon attendance and so on. But you can also look at it a different way, either simultaneously or as sort of an alternative. In terms of specific communities that have very strong needs for, let's say, censorship resistance, or sort of they might not have bank accounts or whatever. And this is sort of a parallel track. That's also very interesting. And so it's worth remembering that retention is key here. That sort of once people start participating, they sort of stay on, because otherwise we haven't actually found like something that's valuable long term. Inclusivity and continuous. And if you think of status as more of a network, then the value that we generate is literally in this sort of network, this ecosystem, this market. And if this value is proportional to the amount of contributors, then what is it? What is the number of contributors we have now? Well, last month, and we don't have really good insight into this, and this points to the importance of contributor metrics, so we can sort of succeed and fail on a sort of high enough granular timeline, so we understand how we're doing here. Yeah, so some wall of shame, sort of cedar things. So we really don't know how well we're doing on this front. And what I mean by that is, sure, we have marketing metrics and we know some GitHub commits and so on, but we don't have it sort of collected in one place in a understandable format so we can actually action on it, which is really what you want. You want these metrics to be clear, and it should be clear when we're failing, and that leads so we can sort of change things and make sort of stats more inclusive. Also, almost all our work is not incentivized in any kind of open form. And the app is just starting to be barely useful enough for us to rely on it. I think we're just about over the hump now. We're very, very close to it. That is not available publicly in the App Store, which is a problem if people want to use it. And then even larger, it's hard to get S&T in the first place, which is sort of where ideas like the Tele network comes in and so on. So that's it for me. Thank you. And with that, I hand over to Michael, I believe.
Yeah. So what's unclear for me is in the first slide, fair and widespread access, Oscar. Are you postulating that it does work on many old devices and languages, and that we do have not first world users, or are you postulating that actually that we should be ashamed of the fact that this is the case?
The latter.
The latter, right? So I mean, we're pretty much building in very modern systems, and vast majority of people's devices are are older, and operating systems are older. You know, billions of devices. Is this something that we can actually even tackle, or are we going to have to be relying on people to play catch up?
So I guess what I want to get to that with that is that we are living in sort of this world where a lot of us use Apple, and we come from sort of first world countries and so on. And if you look at the second core group, which is not sort of our core contributors in the Ethereum network, if you look at people from Venezuela or I don't know, Iran or probably not Barcelona, but anyway, these other places or these sort of informal economies, they don't have the same sort of means and access to the same devices or data plans or whatever. And to develop empathy over these distances is kind of difficult, and just thinking about it and asking ourselves, like, are we actually doing this, or are we just creating something for hipsters in Silicon Valley kind of thing? Not exactly, but essentially same shape as that kind of mentality.
Yeah, so I guess the thing that comes across heaviest to me, and I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on this, is that I like the fact that you didn't approach this from the classic identity politics point of view about inclusion and the warm and fuzzy stuff about us being humans together, but actually the manifestation of the products that it is that we're building. How do people think that we can be more inclusive on a technical level?
I guess we could have a very light client, not in a mean of the blockchain stuff, node stuff, but in a mean of the application, a smaller application that runs in older devices and maybe don't support everything, but just the essentials. So maybe it doesn't have a so pretty UI because the libraries are more limited in older Android. So I think this should be interesting because some people, as Oscar said, they don't have access to latest devices with Android 7, 8, 9. Don't know what is the latest version of Android, or iOS. They have only older devices that usually are even recycled from first countries. So that's something to think about. Maybe we could have a web status that works anywhere.
Yes,
it will take resources more than any of the native application. You will have. But I agree with Ricardo right now. So the technology stack we use is problematic in that case, and I would argue that we will be able to make a more pretty application if we won't use whatever we use right now and make it more accessible at the same time. Because I'm coming from a background where we were building like Opera Mini, which was exactly that light application for very old Android version. I guess just a few years ago, like 2 years ago, we dropped Android 2 support. So it was like 2 and 2.3 and higher. Just recently it was 4. So it's not.
Well, I mean, if we look at the history of let's just stay with chat clients, not even talk about the wallet or browsers. I mean, you know, IRC functioned for years and years and years, and just a really, really simple messaging client. So can we imagine doing a very, very stripped down and just, you know, text-based version of status for that?
I mean, it doesn't have to be text-based. It might be as functional as the current one, except maybe it won't be able to run light clients for you. It's like it will be just linked to Infura or something like that, because that's probably will be resource hungry. But everything else, I'm pretty sure that we can do whatever we do right now with it.
So how do we want to put this on our wall of shame? Does anybody have a succinct statement for that aspect of this that Carrie could?
I think that the people with slower or older devices don't have access to status as users.
Well, one way of phrasing it is that we don't know. We don't even know the limits of, or sort of, we are ignorant about how inclusive we are with respect to devices, and maybe even data and stuff.
Yeah, also, seems like that I cannot install status from App Store, from Play Store, Android Play Store, in tablets. There is any reason why of this?
I mean, not that I'm aware of. Maybe there. Which
That's it.
Android version is that?
That's a great Wall of Shame item as well.
Well, I guess the big question that I'm asking myself is, you know, we're sort of at war with operating systems and stores, and Julian has proposed the idea of extensions, and we're looking at ways that we can build features that we want to have that app stores wouldn't necessarily approve. Should we consider some browser-based version of what it is that we're doing, or is that just a totally insane thought of having, you know, plugins?
So
Browser plugins.
I mean, so I think one thing you have to think about, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but like we're looking at, you know, potentially dApps that can broadcast over Whisper, broadcast messages over Whisper for different types of applications, you know, like gas abstraction is one example. I think the biggest reason for that, and this is more of like, I think something that goes on the wall of shame for the entire ecosystem really, is that most, if you're using MetaMask or if you're using our wallet as well, it's connecting to a node that's not running with Whisper enabled. And so like most services out there that we're using are not running with Whisper enabled, which.
So can we do a Whisper plugin for browsers so that would enable that?
Well, the actual node that it connects to, has to be running with Whisper. Like when you're running get, it has to be running with the Whisper flag. For example, Infura is not running its service with Whisper enabled.
Yeah, but there is a very, very specific reason why they don't do that. It's because of the Whisper, again, stateful architecture. You are not able to run a Whisper node or to use another Whisper node without giving away your private keys to this Whisper node. So no one would want that. I mean, the only way for you to use Whisper that runs on Infura is to give Infura your private keys, which is, I don't think, they don't want that, and you don't want that, I would say.
Right.
But
I wonder if in a browser we can connect to Whisper using something like Leap P2P, and just use WebRTC, that kind of to actually do the peer-to-peer.
Talking about WebRTC as a possible solution.
There were experiments. So there were experiments to run it in the browser. But the problem is that, I mean, in theory, that should be just a protocol level. The problem with Whisper, for example, is that it's built on div P2P. So, you know, you have like 2 layers to implement actually. When Ethereum switches to Leap P2P, that would be easier. So there's definitely
but Whisper is the first thing to switch. They're trying to switch that now. That's the good news. And the second thing that is in our port of Whisper, we're also making this API that allows you to send a raw envelope into.
So this is getting close to being a core dev call. Maybe we can open up a deeper discussion about the possibilities of solving these issues to enable us to be more inclusive with the software that we're building.
One thing I would love from these seminars in general is if we could focus on like problem identification. I think it's great that especially lots of devs we want to sort of solve these problems and talk them through. But in terms of the group that's here and in terms of using the time most efficiently, effectively, maybe it's useful to focus on problem identification and sort of adding to it. And then we can see if this is a real problem, can we actually solve it and so on, as opposed to diving into sort of technically how we would solve it. I think that might be a better use of time.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to point out in terms of inclusivity, that right now it's still a very cumbersome process to start contributing to status in terms of making a development environment and things like that. So for both desktop and mobile, yeah, just I still didn't manage to make desktop build on my machine. But yeah, it's very hard to contribute when you can't really. It's very hard to set up the environment to stuff.
Yeah, I heard that from a lot of people. Yeah. So it's like kind of a recurring problem for many people. Like some people are complaining they cannot build status mobile or status desktop for, at theory they are following the instruction, but it's just so many pieces that it's very hard. And sometimes it's super crazy issues. Some dependencies missing. So yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I like from firsthand experience. I mean, I haven't tried to build status desktop, but I looked at the GitHub repo for it, and as like personally, I've forked other repos just out there on GitHub. For example, the MyCrypto repo is just an Electron repo. It's just really JavaScript, not much else. It was pretty easy to dive in and get working. Status desktop, there's a good amount going on. It's not necessarily accessible to the average developer. It requires a little bit of specialization, I think, right? It uses like Qt, and there's like a little bit of C++ in there, and there's a little bit, there's like a kind of a bunch of different components that maybe the average developer won't be able to just jump in and start hacking away on it.
So I'd like to ask Akshi a question about this. So you're sitting there and listening to all the nerd discussion going on, and you spent some time at Consensus, and now you're here with us at Status. How do you see Studio fitting into this with education and inclusivity and making these things more accessible, actually?
Sure. So I think from my perspective, one of the things that we should do in order to sort of make education via Status in line with our principles, I think, is to have much more, one of the things we can do is to have much more community driven contribution into the content itself around education. That's one. The second thing is, I do think in terms of making it accessible to as many people as possible, which again is a little bit different than the model that we followed at Consensus, was is to make the content obviously freely accessible and not necessarily retain, let's say, revenues from it. Especially in the medium term, short and medium term. So sort of making it freely accessible. If we do have incentive models or, tokens or anything like that within the education realm, it should probably be in a closed system way. And by that, what I mean is, we're not doing that in order to generate revenues for ourselves and just to keep the sort of system going. So I think, freely accessible. In addition to that, making the access to it from a design perspective, I think it'll be very important to make it easy to navigate, easy to search, easy to find, but also available on various platforms, available geographically throughout as much as possible. And, this is something actually we ran into at Consensus around, for example, translations into other languages or, access by geography and things like that. So those are some of the things where I feel like we could do things a bit differently here and be probably even more inclusive, even more collaborative, and even more transparent and open. Does that,
cool. So, that help? Yeah, that's good. So I'd like to get Sean, if he's still online, into this, to give him a chance to talk about the advocacy program, because we have this whole issue. We're starting to build, contribution links and contribution portals, and Sean, how do you see the advocacy program enabling us to get more contributors and to be more inclusive?
Yeah, like right now the idea around the advocacy program is essentially just one mechanism of essentially taking a more passive community and kind of taking them on this journey of becoming more familiar with our values and with the product, and then eventually getting to the point where they can contribute in non-technical ways, yeah, in a host of different mechanisms, and then essentially all becoming mouthpieces and, you know, themselves, I guess, representing status and building their own communities around it. So yeah, right now the idea around the advocacy program is essentially to try and turn 100,000 Twitter followers that we might have, or all of our Telegram people in our Telegram channel, and actually giving them mechanisms to become more active participants and ideally becoming contributors. Maybe not, you know, contributors to the extent that they'll become core contributors. That might not be feasible, but, you know, being able to contribute, whether that's a translation,
network
whether that's
participants, essentially.
Yeah. Yep.
Briefly, just on the translation thing, this weekend I went to this conference in Taiwan, and I was really impressed by the lengths they went to, and it was quite straightforward. So what they did essentially was it was a discussion in Chinese, and they had first they had sort of live, when it was a talk, they had live translations. So there was live feed for who was talking, and it was live translated in English. And then when it was a discussion, you could go to a website, and there was a translator who, someone said something in Chinese, and they live translated into English. So I could hear it in my ears, and then respond in English, and people could hear it back in Chinese, which is this tool that UN uses. And all it requires is one bilingual user, like translator, and some sort of tooling. And it did this for a bunch of languages. And I mean, it's just these types of things. They're like, there's a lot of things we can do. We can imagine doing this for town halls and conferences and other stuff as well, just in terms of possibilities for multi-locale kind of real-time collaboration.
So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everybody for the localization efforts that I've seen happening. It's been amazing to watch us spread out our language footprint and to have that working. I think that's also a point that we can expand upon is being more multilingual, not only in our application but with our communications outward.
Michael.
Yeah.
What about, I was talking to Ola about this last week, about the possibility of just going into a completely hostile environment and seeing what the building blocks or parameters look like to up and run status from a place like that, say in Gaza or Palestine, with a group of, in a type of hackathon or a group there, to see exactly what it would take to, you know, get something up and running there that they would see as useful and keep it running.
Yeah, so there's groups that have gone into refugee camps. I forget the names right now, but there's a number of groups that we can possibly reach out to who are active in war zones and in refugee camps that are actually teaching people how to code and do things. Maybe that's something where that we can reach out and try and do some stress testing and see how it is working in less developed environments.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see what stands right after those tests of like what remains the strongest elements that could help inform building things further.
We had a call with LCA mesh networks that are going to Colombia to set up a mesh network. They were looking for an official client / sponsor / whatever. There's plenty of these initiatives where we could cooperate with somebody that's doing these things.
Good, so let's put that as an action item, Carrie, that to explore those alternatives, how we can reach out into other communities, so we can stress test our applications for people who are less technologically savvy and more technologically challenged, either in the infrastructure, in the environment, or the devices that they're using.
Like cool. Specifically, what they wanted to do was to set up a little microcosm of merchants and a little local economy, and they really needed like a phone client that could serve both for merchants and for people to transact and communicate, right? It's like perfect use case.
Well, isn't that what M-Pesa was? I mean, isn't M-Pesa basically SMS-based economy? And people are communicating and transacting via SMS?
Well, it's basically what WeChat is, but without Big Brother watching over you.
No, but M-Pesa is just like a payment platform with USSD dialogues, and it's nothing else. There is no chat or anything. Again, I happen to work with M-Pesa a little bit. It's very simple,
Right.
and it's essentially one company. It's super simple.
So we're coming to a point. To which degree can we strip status products down to very, very basic communications levels where they don't need the interface elements? They can just be very stripped down, integrated payments and chatting. So what else do we have on our wall of shame, people, in this area in terms of inclusivity? People ops, how do you guys feel about our inclusivity? Do we have enough religions, enough ethnic groups, enough women, enough trans people in our company, in our community?
I see some people complaining about Status Desktop not having a Windows build, but that's kind of, we are still in alpha, I guess.
Well, we are making progress with the Windows build I've seen in the last week, right? There is some.
Yeah, that's something I'm currently working on.
Do we need to have more Windows developers? How do we make that happen?
I think that's mine. It's an identified problem, and I think we know how to solve it.
Yeah.
Roughly.
Yeah.
We can talk about it more, but yeah, outside probably.
Okay, but we want to include that on our document.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And also everyone, like there's a document if you want to just edit directly, that's probably easiest. So just add stuff directly to Wall of Shame.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to get back to also what was said by I don't remember, by Barry, I guess, about the apps. So I still think like we are kind of behind in terms of the Whisper ecosystem and what you can do with that. So hopefully we can try to start doing something more, especially when we switch to status. So I think like so I'm going to propose this idea on the hackathon to build stuff like, for example, bots and other things that you can your things with the public chats and other things. I believe that we we do not use this potential. Like Slack was pretty huge because you could write bots and you could use like kind of interact with the interface and messages using some automated stuff. And we could do this the same way. We are not really doing anything with that.
Right? That's what we're hoping to accomplish with extensions.
Maybe I'm not really familiar with the extension proposal. So what I'm saying here is that like from the apps perspective, that we could like do much more on that area and show people how to connect those two things.
Cool. I'd like to move into social inclusivity. We've been talking a lot about technical inclusivity. Carrie or Steph, how do you guys feel that we're doing on that front?
Hey, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm a little sick, so my voice might be a bit uglier or something. Can you hear me okay?
You sound sweet, Steph, and we can hear you clearly. What do you got to say to us?
That's sweet. I think we are not doing bad, but there is still a lot of things that we could be doing better. I think the first point for me is trying to attract more diverse profiles. And again, we are not doing too bad. I mean, compared with a lot of other, like, in brackets, tech companies, we're doing decently well. We have a lot of females, and that's already a good thing, but I don't see us having enough outreach in areas that are not classical for hiring, so to say. So for example, I would love to have more people joining status from Africa, from Asia, from South America. We do have a bit, thank God. Still, there are some parts where we didn't penetrate much, and I think that's important to keep in mind for the future, because we're kind of risking to have only one perspective on the things that we do product-wise, which is very Western. So
perhaps more testers in those countries that you mentioned, this would help, or you mean real developers?
I think everyone, like in general, having more people, regardless of the role, that can contribute with different perspectives. So for like even like central, having only testers or only developers with that will still create a bit of a situation. For example, funnily enough, a lot of the people that are testing come from the same area, which is fine. But I wonder if it would make sense or shake things up, or like what would other people notice?
So I see that status is inclusivity. It should be like free inclusivity. So we are open, or we should be open to everyone that wants to contribute. And we should only take their arguments, not their, of course, some kind of information about their personal stuff, the place they live, they are in a war zone, as you said, might be interesting to kind of know about the issues they are having, why they are having the issues. But I think the most focus is blind about who is. It's more about the content of the stuff that is being submitted.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. What I'm trying to say is more on a different perspective. It's not like I wouldn't want to even know where people are from, to be honest. So that's not the part. But because I do have access to the data and I see it, I'm feeling like there's probably some ways that we are imagining for whatever we build, how do we know if a person in another area that we don't have anybody coming from would be able to use it? So it's a bit about making the product itself and the things that we say and we do accessible outside of this mainstream group that we see.
I think I can give an example that actually before going to China, I really had no idea that WeChat was that popular and it was used in the way it is, and it really changed my perspective on what this kind of applications could do. And I think Steph is right that there's probably a lot of perspectives that we're missing. How do people use the software in different Middle East countries? How do they use it in Africa? How do they use it in Latin America? It's not just about arguments. So it's just perspectives that we're missing. That only someone who's actually living there, who has a very good experience there, actually understands how those type of applications are used, and what can we do to actually reach those markets more efficiently.
Yeah, or Kenya, where no one has bank accounts, but everyone has a mobile wallet.
I'd like to hear from Lalo, down there in South America. Do you perceive a difference between how it is we in the West or in English-speaking countries perceive and use status as compared to what's happening down there in South America?
Yes, hello everyone. Yeah, it actually is very different, and actually right now I'm in the middle of writing a copy of a blog post for our American tour that we're gonna be doing with Bern. And I'm actually doing a lot of research and trying to figure out the best way to express how status can benefit the Latin American community, because like you mentioned, Nabil, there's a lot of going on right now in Latin America, like political, economics, and people trying to find freedom and economical freedom, of course, right? And there's a lot of issues, like also Ricardo mentioning, like how they can use status if they don't have the latest phones or the latest Android versions, right? Or iOS versions. So what I've been seeing is that maybe we can engage by doing the mesh networks. I've been seeing that around, and we actually been in contact with a person that is going to be doing a tour in Latin America to connect with vendors that are like street vendors or artisanal vendors, so they can start using this kind of technology. But it's kind of like how can I say it? We have to be very open in a way that we don't have to do it just like in the Western way, like Steph mentioned, right? We have to be very diverse in thinking like how we can engage with these people, bring it on board if we wanted to contribute, or if we want them to use status, right? So we have to bring, first of all the resources. And for me, the most important one is education about this technology, not even just about blockchain technology, but just about technology, what technology can benefit you if you use it. Because even though we're like, for example, in Mexico, we're a very evolving country. We do use a lot of technology and digital resources, but we still lack a lot of educational about technology at schools, at universities. Just like the private universities are the ones that get all these conferences or workshops about technology, but not the public ones, right? So just to go back a few months ago, we were present at a couple of universities in Mexico City. They were actually public schools where they opened their doors for us. That doesn't usually happen. They don't accept like external conferences without any approval from the government or that kind of stuff. But we were able to be present there and talk about status and blockchain, Ethereum, and they were all like pumped up. You know, all the students, they were like, okay, this is what we can do with this technology. This is what it can benefit us. This is the new possibility for a new change of society, economical, or politics, you know, or commerce. So
I'd like to ask a question to everybody on the basis of that, without you feeling like I'm cutting you off, Lalo. One of the things that I've been thinking about is, you know, we have our Ghost install where we've done our blog, and we've talked about maybe doing other language installs. We have a blog happening in Chinese, thinking about doing one for the Korean community. How does everybody feel about the idea of having our status just being multilingual? That all of this was happening not only in English, but in all other languages on the blog. Do you guys feel like that would be a more inclusive way to approach it rather than segmenting us into individual language-based portals?
I think that would be a great idea, and I would even extend it further. Like, we could imagine having like the 5 top languages live translating town halls.
I think that but we need to make sure we have the infrastructure and resources to actually do that.
Build that.
Right.
So basically, strive towards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we definitely need it. I'm sorry, are you guys can also play? Is it just me? That would be totally awesome. I think having multi-language, like for all the world, it will be amazing, because not everyone speaks English, and if they do, probably it's not the native language, and it's hard to understand everything we try to share just in English, you know, and it's better to understand it in our native language. And that's something that I've been seeing when I'm sharing like the Spanish blogs that I translate for us to share it for Latin America community or Spanish speaking community. They actually engage with it, and they like it, and they get this knowledge, and they actually tell me like, hey, thank you for sharing this knowledge in Spanish, because there's lack of information in my language and I don't find any resources, right?
Cool. So Carrie, can we put that as an action item in combination with People Ops and with the advocacy program, that we look how it is that we can expand our linguistic presence with the blog and with the town hall and these different things? I think that would be a really great place that we could sink our teeth into. I'd like to move on and ask Rajani.
Sorry, can I just jump in real quickly, just on the blog? One thing I just wanted to add was we should also be very mindful of like the platforms that I guess the community already exists on. So if we look at Naver, for example, in Korea, it is, you know, by far the biggest blogging platform in that region. And I think definitely trying to create more of our blog content, replicating that content in local languages is really important. But I think we should also be mindful of there's going to be a large audience that are going to be still using the platforms which are most commonly used in those countries. And we should probably be mindful of that as well.
We should be platform agnostic, and we should make our data available wherever it is that is good. I totally agree with that, Sean.
Yeah.
I was hoping to get something from Rajani. You know, Rajani, you're out there pretty networked. You're, you know, a very, very social person in connection with a lot of people and peers in the community. How do you feel that we're doing on inclusivity in comparison with other people, other companies?
I couldn't speak actually to other companies. I'm not super sure, but you know, I think with like with exclusivity, like, you know, as long as I guess like a company is like trying and like they're trying to get out there and like it shows within like social platforms and, you know, like the whole thing of having multiple language and stuff like that's a huge step with inclusivity that like most companies don't offer. So I think, you know, kind of when you see us like taking like the big risks and stuff and making sure that we're being inclusive to like everybody, I think like we're, you know, we're taking a lot of the steps in the right direction.
Hey, this is just a quick observation by me. I'm generally, in general, like pretty ignorant as far as like diversity issues go and like how to drive diversity and things like that. But I can't help but notice that with Skin in the Game 3, there's like I think there's 6 people. They're all white guys, right? So I don't have the solution for how to drive diversity on these things, but you can't help but think that when you run these experiments and you have sort of the composition that you do, I mean, don't be surprised if the future becomes more lopsided than the present.
I think one of the interesting things about the Skin in the Game experiment, based on my conversations with Carrie and Steph and other people at PeopleOps, is that there's a perception that you have to like have a certain amount of money to have skin in the game. And I think we can probably do a better job of expressing to people that you can participate at any level, Oscar. You know, you can have $5 or $10. You know, we're not all making the same here at Status. We've talked about that. And some of us may have more disposable income than others, but I think that's also somewhere where we can do better communication.
Michael, also, I wanted to add a point on with the inclusivity around just access and being widespread and fair. I think no matter also where you are geographically as locations, I think one other thing that would really be helpful is having one very simple message that people can believe in. You know, I find it that we get a lot into all these details of things, a lot of you know, details about how things work. But overall, you can get lost in trying to find out what you're doing in the first place. Like to be able to stay focused on an idea of with all these technologies and all these things is very difficult. It's more easier to believe when you go to a group of people in a country and say, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Because I want to build tools that change the world. Okay, cool. So do I. How do I do that? Here's how you do that. Whereas otherwise we get into all these different mixed things and even all these principles that add up to what? You know, I feel like there's another layer on top of this that could be very simple, that when you're talking to people, they also, you know, oh, you're a communist. Oh, you're an anarchist. Oh, you know, you find a common belief that helps people align in a thinking, and then they're willing to put forth effort into the learning because the goal is the same. So I just wanted to say something on, you know, this type of it.
Yeah, so I think that we're moving towards now that we've defined our principles and we're talking about them for the you know, in this series of seminars. There's also a little bit in the air about us finding a mission statement And I don't want to go into that in this part of the seminar, but it's definitely somewhere where I think that we can be inclusive, is in finding a mission statement along the lines that Ned's talking about that is simply translatable and simply cross-cultural and cross-lingual and things like that is also somewhere where I think that we can do some great work. I really like seeing what's happening in grassroots that Nabil has introduced. I think that a lot of work and a lot of direction can come out of that. Looking forward to discussing these things in Prague. Is there anything that we haven't covered so far? Anybody that has something they'd like to add that maybe is on a point that we've missed?
So there is also the thing about interoperability that kind of touches this, because interoperability means that in past messenger companies like ICQ and MSN and AOL, they competed for their user. For example, WhatsApp, WeChat, their users are their products. So in our side, the user is not our product. So we can have our user using another application, for example, a fork, and this fork can communicate with all the status version. Cannot even be status, can maybe missed, implement chat, and start talking with status users. So for this inclusivity, maybe we can have another forks that are made also by status to, for example, enhance another culture, maybe a status fork for Latin America. Maybe it's different, the way, the design and the user interface is different for them because they like that way. So that's another powerful tool we have to reach inclusivity. Because
Can I bring Ned back into this discussion in terms of accessibility in our visual language? How do you think that we can improve ourselves there, Ned?
Sorry, in terms of visual language?
Basic accessibility guidelines. How are we doing there in terms of our visual language? How accessible are we?
I think we're only as accessible as the people that are creating it at the moment. I think it would be really interesting to see first in our own organization what people need or what they think is important, and then finding the balance there, and then testing that in the real world and going, even like Ricardo said, to, I don't know, Asia or Latin America, and see how they, with this base, would change and shift things to would be most optimum for their solutions. Because who are we to decide what's best for anybody else, right? Who am I as the designer to say this is best for China? I don't know, I think you can only get the proof from the honest results of what the people want to have. And we start with ourselves with that.
And do you feel like we have that framework currently? Is that the way it is that it's working internally currently?
No, I don't think so. I think that if we want to act in a kind of, I don't know, decentralized manner or with a decentralized design system, we should agree on that and then test it for ourselves. It doesn't make sense that we say we are and then we have, things in place that determine what other people can and can't use. So I think it goes against our principles.
So if you think about forking a client, in old Messenger, for example, we have always MSN Messenger Plus that was a hacked version of the official client that was against the rules of the use of the terms, users' terms, but everyone was using it because it has a lot of better features. And so maybe we should incentivize the forking, incentivize the customization of our clients, because people naturally do it. We have even WhatsApp Plus. I don't know if it still works, but my brother loved that because it could change the background to black, and then it would save the battery because it's AMOLED, and so people want customization, and maybe we don't.
So that sounds like, excuse me for interrupting you. That sounds like another good action item is incentivizing forks, incentivizing other usages of status? How can we go about doing that?
Making these customizations available and easily toggleable and stuff.
I mean, or you just audit what currently there is and create it in such a generic or universal way that people don't even need to, to actually be hostile with it. It can also just be that the platform is encompassing enough to facilitate any kind of needs.
To be clear, are we talking about forking the software, or are we talking about usage of the protocol? Because I kind of always picture that the clients that we develop would just be one of the clients available. And if the protocol is clearly specified, then people could write their own clients from scratch, and maybe in a completely different language, a completely different stack, that interact with the protocol in their own way.
That's definitely the way this space and the decentralization, and anything that's been successful in decentralization works. And that's how all the blockchain networks currently work. Is you build a protocol, then you have reference implementations of that protocol, which people can then fork and build in whichever way they want to. So as long as you adhere to the protocol, you can do whatever you want. Currently, it's difficult to work status implementation to then work on the same protocol. So we either need to figure out how to make that easy, or think about BitTorrent, right? BitTorrent's the exact same way. There's many implementations of sharing and using torrents, but it's all following the same protocol. Ethereum's the same way with its multiple implementations. How do we do the same thing? We're building the reference implementation of using whatever we call the status protocol. And then people can do whatever the hell they want with the status reference implementation to then change it the way they'd like to have it. Because we can't do it all. We don't have the resources. Or if we do, we need to then allocate those resources appropriately. But
so I guess the question is, how do we incentivize that?
First, it's like
make it valuable.
Yeah, so, I think the fact that this is a lot of static. I think the fact that it is a decentralized communication platform or provides a lot of value for a lot of different type of applications. Well, just the protocol, the reference for the protocol needs to be specified very clearly and almost separately from the reference implementation, so anyone can read it and then create their own software that interacts with that network. So that in that sense, status becomes a platform really that people can build things on top of it, not just dApps that they can build for a mobile app.
That's the way I felt about a week after coming into status, is I thought that it was a platform play. So we're at the end of, we've got 2 minutes left on this hour. Oscar, would you like to say something in closing, or suggest any other things that we can do to continue these conversations and where those should happen?
No, yeah, so just thank you everyone for participating. I think it's been really awesome to see everyone sort of contribute their perspective. I would love it if we could continue this discuss, and also people, this HackMD links, you can sort of add stuff to the wall of shame and so on. And ideally, I would like it if we could get some more input on the wall of shame, and then we can sort of use it to prioritize it and start to attack it and attach it to our OKRs and discussion in Prague. I guess for specific actions, it would be great if we could get the sort of links up on Discuss, and then we can continue discussions. And then we'll see each other tomorrow for censorship resistance and security. And thanks again, everyone, for participating, and Michael and Kerry for helping out with the logistics.